Are you having a midlife crisis? Actually, did you know that today millennials are having midlife crisis between the ages of 30 and 45, which is much earlier than the prior generations where it was expected to have a midlife crisis between the age of 50 and 60. Isn't that wild?
It is wild. I still don't have a Ferrari yet, though. So does that mean I haven't hit my midlife crisis?
I think that's the old way of how we used to view the midlife crisis. You know, you'd see the movie or the thing, and he'd be driving up in a Corvette and be like, oh God, Steve had a midlife crisis. So we're going to talk about what is a midlife crisis? What is it actually? Why is it happening sooner in our generation? And maybe a different way of looking at it.
Hey, welcome back to The Pursuit of Happy Well, the show that we talk about what it means to build a happy and well life. Markers, things that we don't usually look at being those success markers that help us build a happy, well life. And today, going into this idea that apparently midlife crisis has moved.
Yeah, it's happening sooner in the timeline for this generation than other generations prior. In fact, one of the most frequently asked questions in Reddit communities from the ages, I think it's like the Reddit communities 40 and up. So if you're in your 40s, this is a great episode for you. If you're not quite in your 40s yet, and maybe like you're in your early 30s, mid 30s, or later in life, really this is for anyone. But we are talking about how there seems to be this phenomenon happening with millennials where they are having midlife crisis, as they're calling it, sometime between the age of 35 and 45. And in the Reddit communities, the number one question that's asked is this it? Which kind of creates the whole crisis.
Say more.
Is this it? Is this all there is?
Okay, got it.
Because at this point in life, you're kind of into your later season of your career. You've maybe had the promotions. You're maybe in an upper management job, or you're in the next, phase of entrepreneurship, or, your kids are older. Your parents are getting older. You're not in the trenches of like surviving the baby phase. And if you are, God bless you. Like how you're doing it in your 40s, bless you. But you're in this shift where it's like, all right, got the career, check, house, check, kids, check, all these things, shuffling the kids to and from sports practices, check, 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 married, partner, maybe not, maybe you're, alone, maybe you're like single or whatever, but the question still is this really all there is to life?
So are you telling me then that all the markers I've been looking out for in the sense of like, waiting for that Ferrari for my midlife crisis, waiting for that, big career change, these things are no longer, maybe that's not exactly what a midlife crisis is anymore?
I think it could still look like that. I think it could still look like maybe, I see this trend on social media. It's like where it's called like the millennial urge to,
Go skydiving?
No, well, that, or like the millennial urge to quit everything, open up a coffee shop and sell books and, to move to the countryside and raise chickens. It's just like, why are we craving a change in scenery? Why is that coming up for us?
Yeah. I think it's good. The idea of walking through this idea of a midlife crisis. I think we grew up, I don't know if this is still like pop culture, but I think I remember like growing up, all the movies would talk about like the midlife crisis, and it was this quintessential, you get the new house, or you go skydiving, or you make this big career change, or a new car, right? And I think sometimes, case in point, like I remember when we had our kids, and my only thoughts or my expectations of like having kids was going to be like this chaotic scene of like grabbing all the bags and rushing out. And I think some people still have that, but for us, it was like very, very different.
Tell me more, because I feel like that was. I'm like, wait, what? Did we have the same experience? What are you talking about?
Well, you were induced, and so it was like I felt like I was just
you're
checking
talking
into
about like
the hospital.
having a baby. You're talking about like the actual birthing. I thought you were talking about like the parenting process.
Oh,
I'm
no,
like,
yeah,
no, there was running out the door with bags and all that stuff. No. Thankfully, my birth experience was really amazing experience, a great doctor. But I will say there's this idea, I think how I used to view, quote, midlife crisis, I would picture somebody that's coming up on retirement, picture somebody that's definitely not me.
Older.
I pictured somebody like my parents' age or something.
Empty nest.
Something, but I also them blowing up their life in some unpredictable way. Like, dude, what happened to Steve? Like, hi, Steve, if you're listening.
That's my dad. Why'd you choose that name?
I don't know. It just felt like it landed. Steve. Going through a midlife crisis.
We're not talking about you,
know, Sarah, or whatever. It's just like, oh, what happened to them? They just packed up and moved one day. Gone. We never heard from them again. Like, this, which I do think happens. I think we see this like massive external change for something that's happening internally. So there's a different way of viewing midlife crisis. There's like how we think it is and what it actually is and why it's happening sooner. And I do think maybe it's happening sooner because you and I have talked about this. We're like, why is, kind of what we see on social media, it's like millennials not in a panic watching their fourth once in a lifetime recession.
Yeah.
It's just like, we're so jaded.
Yeah.
And I was like, Scott, why are we like that? Why is our generation so like, And I think that this idea of jaded, and maybe that's why midlife crisis is happening sooner, is in some form we feel jaded.
Yeah.
Or like bamboozled in some way.
Bamboozled.
Yeah. Well, I just feel like the American dream, it's like, okay, this was kind of, now I do think Gen Z has a different picture of the American dream than our generation does. And so there's this, the American dream of like the house, the dogs, the kids, the, stable job and I think I picture like the Truman Show, like you've arrived and, the millennials and I think Gen X is there too, is just like, okay, first of all, when I look at things, ain't looking so good. Like I'm here, it's not everything that was promised to me.
That's another episode, I think, in itself.
Yeah, it is. But let's talk about this.
Well, the thing that keeps coming to my head is I'm thinking of Nate Bargatze. Is that how you say his name?
Bargatze. Bargatze.
The comedian who talks about like, hey, in your 20s, like someone calls you at 9:00 at night and you're just like, where are we going?
Let's go.
Let's go. Where are we going? And then in the 30s, you're like, well, who's driving? Who's driving?
What time does it start?
What time does it start?
I will drive separate.
I will drive separate. And then your 40s. I'm not
going anywhere.
I'm not going.
I'm not. You know where I'm going? From the couch to my bed.
Yeah.
At 9:00 at night.
Yeah.
Maybe 8:30.
I saw another post on TikTok today that said, in my age now, I have to look at the clock not to see if it's bedtime, but to see if it's if it's late enough to go to bed.
What is it? Wait, what? If it's late enough to go to bed?
Meaning like,
can I go now?
Can I go now? Is it too early to go to bed right now?
I think yes. I'm just like,
okay. So back to this the
midlife crisis. The breakdown. We'll just call it the breakdown, where reality and expectation, I think there's a mismatch there, and it breaks down this. It's not what I thought it would be, or why does this feel hollow? Why does this thing I was once chasing, maybe now that I have it, or maybe you don't have it yet, but the pursuit of the thing, of attaining the thing, having the thing, feels empty, meaningless, exhausting. It's lost its luster, for lack of a better term.
Well, what we're gonna dive into is gonna expose that thought even more. And I think actually it works really well with what we're talking about in the sense of this podcast of the pursuit of happy well, and what we're chasing at a first part of our life in comparison to the second part, and what actually produces real happiness and what real fulfillment. And so, Carl, is it Jung?
No, it's Carl Jung.
Gosh darn it.
Yeah.
I practiced this beforehand, but Carl Jung, he has this idea that he talks about two halves of life. And that the first half is all about essentially like the external. And so it's the career, it's building the ego, it's family roles, and that you spend the first part of your life, the first half of your life, building that part up and creating kind of a sense of self through accomplishments, career initiatives, whatever it might be. And then that the second half of life is then taking that to a deeper meaning, right? So the second half is more about, and he has this meme that someone showed me, a good friend of mine, Growthy, showed me. And gosh, it's just a powerful quote, this idea that life doesn't really begin until you're 40, that everything before that was just research. And when you sit with that for a moment, you're just like, whoa. If there's a lot of meaning and understanding of what's happening. And also to think that like, I turned 40 this year. And so that hit me.
We both do. We both turned 40 this year.
Both turned 40 this year. And so that really hit me in the sense of like, man, I do feel this shift in me from a first to a second half.
Oh, absolutely. My therapist even told me it was coming, and I've been with her for a while. I feel like she told me 2 years ago. And she was like, hey, there's this, there's two halves of life, and you're going to shift into the second half. And it's fairly uncomfortable because you are letting go of all the things you used to define you or your worth or your place in the world. And that kind of, deconstructs. You deconstruct your sense of self and you boil down to, okay, what actually matters? I've been told what matters by culture, media, family, upbringing, peers, colleagues, whatever it is. And then you actually come to the fork in the road where you're like, okay, but here's what actually matters to me. I've lived some life now. I've maybe tasted some of the things that I sought after. And now I'm actually asking myself, so we've done research and now we know, like, I know what I like now.
Right.
I know what matters to me now. It's almost like a value exploration of the first half of our life. Like, what do you actually value? And then the second half is living that out.
Yeah, living into it. It's that idea of like building legacy, right? What legacy are you leaving behind? And then the first half constructing the outside, if you will, the first half, the ego, so forth, and the inside saying, okay, what aligns at the soul level, right? What's the legacy that I want to leave?
Yeah. And I think that if we don't know that, I think we misinterpret the feeling as something has gone terribly wrong.
Yeah, meaning like we don't know that that's coming.
Yes. If we don't know that that's a necessary and healthy shift of like, okay, I'm shifting from first half of life to second half of life, I think it can be interpreted as an identity crisis or a midlife crisis. Like, oh my gosh, like I've built all of these things and for what? And what does it matter, or those things? And it does matter. Like building your sense of self does matter. But there is this quote, I like this quote, what worked in life's morning doesn't work in the afternoon of life. So, how you lived your first half of life, we can be thankful for that. We take all of our lessons and we're like, okay, I have this sense of truer self now, not the self that I thought I maybe had to be, was trying so hard to be, engineering myself to be.
Yeah.
Now that I understand this part of me, now I'm going to live this second half of life differently than I lived my first half. And it's so funny because I would hear people say that. I would hear people say, man, wait till you get to 40. You're just not going to care what people think anymore. And I'd be like, how does that even work? Like, what do you mean I'm not going to, like, I'm just going to not care what people think? And I actually think it really is, I'm going to be so sure of who I am that what people think will matter less. Like I don't need, my identity is less shaped and formed by the external in the second half of life.
I think it's only possible though if we slow down enough to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Because I think if we continue just to chase and chase and chase and try and continue to build the ego and we stay in the first half, cling to that, I think we're going to struggle with that season of shifting into the second half.
Oh, I think it becomes a fight.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. In fact, I think Richard Rohr, which you're going to lead us into next, talks about that in a beautiful way.
Yeah. He has this book, Falling Upwards. And, man, he has written a lot of really beautiful books, and it was one that my therapist had recommended a couple years ago, and I think she gave it to me again. I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, and she's like, "You're ready now." It was
this
just
one
like,
now it's gonna hit.
she's like, "You're ready now." I think because she
Handed the
saw
lightsaber
me,
over.
like it kind of felt like that. It was like, my young Padawan, you now can become the Jedi of second half of life.
It's like, do you remember as a kid when you got your first house key?
Oh yeah,
That was
yeah.
like a thing. I had like a keychain or
We're definitely aging ourselves for sure.
yeah, now it's like a code, right? But like, you went to the hardware store and you picked out like the special key that they would carve out. I think mine had like hot rod flames on it or something.
Yeah. I remember that. You could pick out all the colored patterned keys. I remember that. But yeah, it's like, I felt, she was like, you're now ready. You can hear this, because unless you're ready to burn down the ego, it really does, because the shift into the second half is this sense of not like you're like, oh, none of it matters. It does. You're having an internal shift into, this is what used to define me.
Mm-hmm.
This is what deeply matters now. And now I live my life that way. And so it's kind of like a recalibration of self under a new set of values. And it's important to, and you do have to slow down. And it does, I will say, when you are clinging to the ego of like all the metrics that was for your first half of life, when you're clinging to that and your soul is longing for something more meaningful, I think we create a lot of suffering for ourselves. Because I think the soul is crying out and we're too busy kind of answering to the ego of like, yeah, but who am I without those things? Yeah, but so there has to be almost this like safety for ourselves in being willing to sit with, okay, yeah, who am I without those metrics? Who am I without those things? So there is a kind of a death of what was.
Well, let's look at, what does Richard Rohr say about, do you want me to describe that?
You could describe it.
So Richard Rohr writes about this idea that the life is set in two halves similar.
Yeah.
But he says the first half is basically constructing the container. So it's still the ego, it's still the family roles, it's still chasing your career.
Yeah.
But it's setting up this container, the structure for what's going to happen in the second half, which is then, okay, let's create this structure, this container. The second half is filling it.
Yes.
What's going to go in there?
Yes.
Right? It's the filling, it's filling that container with meaning, filling it with depth, filling it with spiritual growth, and that the shift, in order to make that shift into the second half, it requires the structure, a strong structure of a strong container.
A sense of self. Yeah, your strong sense of self, so that you can actually fill the container or fill the self with the things that actually matter. It's like the pursuit of the deeper meaning.
Yeah.
And
so
meaning behind the things.
So like David Brooks talks about this idea that the second half, the meaning, the legacy, is this idea of like eulogy values. Right? Like this, when you think about that, it's like,
it's kind of depressing.
No,
I mean like, eulogy, but no, that's incredibly powerful.
Oh, it's so powerful. I'll never forget. I'll tell this quick story. I used to work with high school students back in the day, and one experience we did, we went to a graveyard, into
cemetery. That's the word.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking. I was like, there's another word that graveyard. Graveyard sounds so grave.
You said it like you'd been pondering that all day.
I was. I don't know why, but I was like, cemetery. That was a very ADHD moment. Okay, go ahead.
So we went to a cemetery. We went to, and we looked at headstones. And while we were there, we had kids look at the headstones and read the epitaph, right? In the sense of like, what was this one line, these 6 words, how did it describe these individuals? And it was a very sobering moment to try and I'm not saying that we should all try and summarize our entire life with 6 words, but like what a sobering moment to think about it, a life lived and looking at a headstone with 6, 8, 10 words.
Gosh, what if you could only have 6 words about you at the end of life?
What would it say?
Whew.
But that's the
Yeah.
idea behind this like shift into the second half, is that it's going to be these eulogy, these epitaph, these legacy, deep meaning pieces. And what Rohr actually talks about, and you were talking about this earlier, was that if you cling to the first half, the building of the container, if you cling to the first half, it actually stunts and prevents growth, spiritual, deep soul growth.
You know what just came to mind as you were saying that? Like clinging to the old and not letting yourself move into deeper meaning is like, oh my gosh, it's like watching the person that, quote, peaked in high school, where all they can do is cling to that one football game when they were like, the all-star player, and like they keep living in the past and not leaning into, but what is available for me now?
Yeah.
Who am I now without, if you think about it, like they're building a teenager is building a container in
right now.
in high school.
Yep.
They're building their container now, but like I think of like in a little microcosm is like they're building their little container of self in high school, and they're like, this is my peer groups, my grades, sports, all of these things. This is the container in which I understand myself. And then, maybe they have their own little miniature identity crisis leaving high school because they've left this container of the things that they were using to define them. And now they're going to college and they're like, oh, who am I now with these new friend groups and this new thing? And so as adults, I think we are going through that ourselves. Like this, like, okay, here is this, like, here's the thing I built. Okay, now what does it look like to fill it with meaning instead of just chasing
the external,
right?
100%. I mean, working with youth back in the day, we used to talk about middle schoolers and college students being very similar in the sense that like a middle schooler is still trying to figure out themselves and their appendages.
Their appendages. Like a little giraffe that just was born flopping around.
Middle school and freshmen. I mean, that's 100% right. But they're figuring out like, have these little antennas out, like, do you like me? Do you like me? Do you like me? And that happens again in college. It's another rediscovery of like, do you like me? Do you like me? Do you like me? And so in middle school, you kind of built this thing. You go into high school, you try and wear that, right? You put a hat on, you wear it. And then in college, you almost start to take those hats off and be like, okay, I wore this hat. This is how I was known in high school. But in college, I don't know if I want to keep wearing that same hat.
Yeah.
And I would say it's like a mini midlife, if you will, in the sense of like, I want to have more meaning and depth to me.
Yeah. Well, it's no different than like, a professional athlete that retires, like Tom Brady. I think like he tried to retire that one time. And then I think there was a failure of like if the container was just built around, this is who I am as a football player and, all these Super Bowl rings and this is who I am and this is how I see myself. Well, if that's gone, like where is he getting meaning from?
Yeah.
Who am I? And so
great conversation beyond Tom Brady is for all of us to ask ourselves, like, is your identity only defined by your role?
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of us can get lost in that. And so, and then when the role changes, identity feels hard. Hence why, empty nesters or those things. So this idea, like the shift though, it's, it feels like falling or failing. Like it's important to know, like if it feels awful, it's probably right. I can't describe it as a different way because it's like the death of what you knew and held and realizing there's more and laying it down and realizing there's more for me to discover here than just this, what I've been chasing my whole life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not, yes.
And I don't think it's necessarily a death per se in the sense of like, it's a redefining what your metrics are.
But no, I would disagree because it feels like some of my things did have to die.
Oh, okay. I see where you're going.
So that new things could be born.
Yeah.
Like I had to let go of some things and be like, I have this, like literally the soul cries out, this is out of alignment with my values. And the ego wants to hold on to this. So perfect example was the business.
Yeah.
Like the ego wanted to hold on to it, being like, but this is where I get recognition and validation, and I'm on stages, and I matter here, and I, my name and all these things and metrics and success, and then laying that down is a death of an ego of some kind, and realizing I'm letting this go so that new can be born. It's like lending the capacity and space for like, and now I will fill the container with things that are deeply meaningful with new metrics.
Right. Yeah, exactly. New metrics is that idea we talked about a couple of podcasts ago, is like living your life based upon a new set of metrics.
Yeah. So I kind of talked about like my midlife crisis, which was absolutely last year for sure. Woo.
And you're still alive.
I'm still here. What was it like? I feel like you had one. Would you say you kind of had a?
Yeah. Well,
I don't know if it was. Well, are we calling it crisis now? Midlife awakening.
I think. Yeah. I think the redefining it from crisis is
the shift.
Is the shift.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think that's the big shift. Is we might walk into this, or we have the Hollywoodized view of midlife, and we view it as a crisis. And rather than allowing that to be the narrative, shifting that into midlife breakthrough.
Yeah.
Or midlife rediscovery, or, however you want to shift, however you want to relabel that. But I think for me, like when you talk about Tom Brady, because I was once Tom Brady. Why are you laughing?
That's your, what? No.
That is terrible. You're supposed to be my biggest cheerleader.
Yes, you were.
What I mean by that,
you.
Yes, now you are. What I mean by that is, I had a job prior. I was working with youth in the ministry, and I defined myself that way. And so when I think about the container and the ego and finding your identity in your role, what I mean by that, and I think it happens a lot with a lot of people, I think specifically a lot with men, and this is why I think retirement is so hard for a lot of men, is because they have been known for a particular role, especially if they've been very, very successful, and they've had a lot of people that were subordinates, that reported to them. All of a sudden you step out of that, and then who are you?
Yeah.
Right?
Do you matter? Who's coming to you with the questions, and
what problems are you solving?
Yeah.
Right?
Am I needed?
Yeah. 100%. And so part of that midlife for me was like redefining, okay, who is Scott? Right? If the ego I built was in this particular industry or this particular place of business, if I was the leading real estate agent in the city and I've retired from that, that could create a crisis.
Oh, for
if
sure.
We've done none of the internal work of defining, okay, what's the legacy? What makes my heart beat? Where is my soul filled? Right? Because we're clinging to continuing to build the external, the container, as Rohr would say. And then we're stunting ourselves as a little adolescent crack comes through, as we're stunting our growth as we move forward. And so, this could also look like, maybe you're in a season of life where you're an empty nester and your kids you've just become that. And so then the roles of like constantly running schedules and planning and, packing lunches and being on top of all the, the performances and the sports arrangements, whatever it might be, those have gone away. And so now you're an empty nester and you're asking, now what?
Yeah. What does my world revolve around now? If not not like caregiving,
right.
Or people that are caring for, a parent that, passes, and they're like, oh, what do I do here? Especially again, finding value in the role, and not, something deeper.
Not your identity.
Right. Yeah. Right. So here's the thing, like midlife is not about you going crazy. It's about you waking up to yourself and being like, oh, this is what actually matters. And so, this is really, I think it has to break down so you can make space. You have to be able to make space for the things that matter. And that does mean either reorienting some things or killing some things off. Now, some people maybe just feel this like, I just know I need change, like feeling like restless. And so they assume it's like, all right, selling everything and I'm getting a boat. And there's no lake nearby. Be like, why? Why? But like that extreme, or like I'm moving to Bali. I'm going to be a travel blogger.
Yeah.
Kind of like we talked about a couple episodes ago. Everywhere you go, there you are.
Yeah. Well, in that same episode, we talked about this idea that sometimes our unhappiness in our role is actually because we're just not self-aware. Because I can't remember the stat right now. It's like 32% report with a growth in self-awareness, better job satisfaction.
Yeah.
Right. And so sometimes we feel the urge just to do this massive change because it's a big Band-Aid ripoff and we think that everything's going to change with it, when really maybe there's some reflection that we could do to help bring some satisfaction to our current now.
Yeah.
Right. And so, so the idea of this midlife crisis, maybe it's midlife shift, midlife breakthrough, is really about the idea of breaking down the ego. Cracking it open.
Yeah. Cracking the ego open and just realizing it's an invitation to explore, because you cannot build the second half of your life on your ego scaffolding. Like you have to build it differently. And it's a really beautiful invitation, but it's one that requires you have to slow down.
Yeah.
You have to take the time to reflect. Otherwise we end up making really impulsive decisions to settle the
unrest.
Yeah, the unrest. It's just your soul saying, I'm growing.
I'm meant for more.
I'm meant for more.
Yeah.
Right? And that doesn't mean like you're like, oh, I need to be on stages and writing books. Maybe for you it is, maybe. But you have to be able to give the space, right?
Yeah. I like some of these notes we made, just like this idea of the second half shifts. This idea of like going deeper rather than faster. So depth over speed.
Yeah.
Or the idea of presence over productivity, which we talked about a couple episodes ago.
I just think that's always going to be my work, to be totally honest with you.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of our work. I think we're so quick. What was the quote that you heard from Norway when someone says like, hey, how are you doing?
I'm not up. I'm up and not crying. So that's good. Yeah.
I'm up and not crying.
I'm up and not crying.
When our typical, like, when people say, how are you doing? Oh, good.
Good, fine.
But we never take the moment just to pause and be present. Because we feel that either we feel we're inconveniencing someone or we're unwilling to go that deep.
Oh, I'm just deeply uncomfortable with what comes up in the slow and the quiet. And that is, part of how I cope in the world is, I will busy myself. I will busy myself to distraction for sure. To the point where when I went on that retreat, I remember this idea of like, depth over speed. I went, for this 5-day intensive or whatever. And my very productive, efficient self showed up there. And I told my guide, really my therapist, but they call him a guide. At the end, I called her my trauma Sherpa. And she's like, I can't carry your trauma, but I can carry you.
So good.
But there was a moment where she invited me to sit down. We were overlooking the area and she's like, let's just sit here. I was so annoyed. I was like, we've got work to do. I've spent a lot of money.
Chop, chop.
I flew here. We have a lot of things to unpack together. So it felt very inefficient to be sitting there and taking it in. She's like, no, we're just going to sit. And I was like, okay. And I could feel myself like, I didn't have my Apple Watch on me. Couldn't tell the passage of time. And all I was just like, we got to get to the work. My whole internal narrative was like, we got to get to work. We got to get to work. So much to do. And then I started crying. I don't even know why. I'm just sitting there in silence. I'm starting to cry. And I really think it was because I was that uncomfortable with slow. And she saw it and she said, that is the work. Just so you know.
I feel like there's a whole nother episode right there.
But this is like making space for slow in a world that is built for fast and efficient and convenient and productive. And what are you doing and producing? And So slow can feel scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So presence over productivity. And then the last one.
Meaning over metrics.
I love that one.
Yeah. Well, that's what the whole premise of the show is. It's like,
Right.
here's the metrics we thought that mattered. And then here are the things with meaning that matter. And this is why it's so important, because meaning is deeply individualized to you. Like, what matters to you? I do think so much of life for a long time, we're just holding on to the things that we're told by others. Like, this matters. This is important. Go for this. Do this. And then when we're actually holding it, as we're feeling that unrest, and maybe our soul is saying like, yeah, but that's not aligning for me. And letting go of that and being like, now if I do hold this thing, I'm going to hold it with a different meaning. Right.
Yeah.
It's not letting go of metrics. I think that's important. Like, you can still have metrics.
100%.
But it's metrics with meaning.
Yeah. Metrics
that are value aligned to you as a person as you're entering into your second half of life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so we have I think some really good questions to ask. But before we get there, I feel like this is an episode.
Yeah. This is a doozy.
Yeah. But maybe not processed alone.
No, I think, listen, if you've listened to this episode and you're like, this is what my friend group is talking about right now, when we're sitting on the sidelines and talking about life, like we're all feeling this shift, send this episode to a friend. Be like, dude, listen to this. Let's talk about this. Send it to a friend who maybe has told you, I think I'm having a midlife crisis, or maybe they've told you I should buy a boat or move to Bali. Be like, stop before you do that. Just listen to this episode real quick and let's talk about it. So be sure to, subscribe, share it with a friend. Tell us the questions, Scott.
Yeah. I think these are doozies.
Okay. Ouchie.
Ouch. I don't know if they're ouchie per se, but maybe, I guess if you're clinging to the container that Roar's talking about, these could be pretty ouchie.
Yes.
But so just two questions, and they kind of have two parts. So the first one is, what part of you is trying to retire, but you keep resurrecting?
Damn.
Great. I don't know if I have to bleep that out. I don't know how podcasts work.
No, we can say damn.
Okay. So what part of you is trying to retire, but you keep resurrecting? That's question number one. And I really think that should be one that you walk through with a friend. Journal on it, maybe yourself, but have a conversation. And if you're a dude and you listen to this, go lift some weights, go throw some rocks at a stick,
throw some rocks at a stick.
Hey, this is a real thing. Have you ever seen dudes that have nothing to do in the middle of a field? They'll make a game.
That is true. True.
There'll be a post out in the middle of the field.
Yep.
Or a rock, and they'll find other rocks and try and hit that rock.
It's true.
I actually saw a reel once of some guys that made up this game, and that made me want to play.
That seems on brand.
Throw rocks at stuff.
Seems on brand. But
Anyways.
What part of you is trying to retire that you keep resurrecting? I will tell you, just very shortly, that was totally me for a while before I knew what was happening. And just I felt like I was trying to force a square peg through a round hole. And it was I was having panic attacks and I couldn't understand why. And I really do believe my soul was like, we can't be here anymore.
Yeah.
And I kept trying to resurrect it for my ego, right? Being like, but, right? Okay, so second question. What is life asking you to release so something truer or more meaningful can rise? What do you need to let go of so that something more meaningful or truer can rise up in you, through you? There's more. The shift into the second half, I hope this didn't scare you. I hope it maybe eased the burden, and maybe you felt like, oh, that's why. That's why I have been on Zillow thinking if I move, to the country, I'm going to feel better. Or if I quit the job, buy the Ferrari. I don't know. It's just your soul saying, I'm ready for a new set of metrics and a different conversation about this next part of my life, and you being brave enough to meet yourself there and say, okay, let's have the conversation.
Midlife breakthrough, not crisis, midlife breakthrough. Hey, listen, that's today's show. We would love for you to join us in our Facebook group, Pursuit of Happy Well podcast, free community.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll be in the description below or in the show notes. Until then, share this with a friend, subscribe. We really do want to continue these conversations. We're excited about what the Happy Well life is going to bring when it comes to setting new metrics.
We'll see you in the next episode.
Hasta la vista.
No.
That's a good one.